Joining us on the line right now, Peter Brookes, Senior Fellow, National Security Affairs at the Heritage Foundation, and by the way, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Good day to have him in to talk about what should be done regarding ISIS and about the confirmation hearing that took place yesterday for Ashton Carter, the man the president has chosen to be the next Secretary of Defense. Good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning.
Let's start with those confirmation hearings up on Capitol Hill yesterday. I heard Ashton Carter say some things that I don't think are in absolute sync with what the President of the United States has stated our policy is. Is that your assessment as well?
Well, I thought it was largely predictable that he's going to say, hey, I'm going to talk truth to power when I'm Secretary of Defense. Of course, we'll have to see what happens after he gets inside. But nobody signs up to be a senior cabinet official or a cabinet official without signing on to the president's agenda. So my sense was that this was mostly not so much about Ash Carter, who seems to be liked by the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, but about President Obama's policies.
All right, here's what he said when asked about whether or not he would be able to get to the President of the United States.
And if I'm confirmed as Secretary of Defense, I will be a stickler for the chain of command.
Will he actually be able to get to the President of the United States? Other Secretaries of Defense have said that they had difficulty in this.
Well, I read that the different way, Brian. I mean, I see that as he's saying that I'm going to follow what the President tells me to do. He's a senior advisor to the President on military affairs, but he's going to say that I'm going to do what the President says to do. That's what the chain of command is that eventually when the President makes a decision on policy, you stand there and salute the flag, and you do what he says you're going to do. So that's how I read that. Maybe I've taken that out of context. But getting access to the President is a challenge, and we've heard the stories about how the national security team is rather insular.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to penetrate it. We're on our fourth Secretary of Defense if Ash Carter is confirmed in 6 years. And we've heard what we've all read and heard what Bob Gates and Leon Panetta and Chuck Hagel have said about this. So it may be a very, very difficult job for him. And in some ways, he's doing a patriotic duty to try to push the country in the right direction. But once again, he's part of the Obama team.
Peter Brookes, from your experience in the Defense Department and the position you held, when he talks about the chain of command, where exactly does Valerie Jarrett fall into that? Was she there? Did you have to answer to her, or?
Well, I don't believe there is.
Yeah,
exactly. If you talk about the military chain of command, it would go from the Secretary of Defense on military matters to the President of the United States, who's the Commander-in-Chief.
Yeah, someone tell Susan Rice that.
Well, that's right, because the familiarity and the access is critically important. And if you're working in the West Wing and you see the President every day, I mean, there's this old saying in Washington that people joke about called the pillow syndrome, is that the last person to sit on the politician makes the biggest impression. And so that's important. So if the Secretary of Defense comes in and says one thing to the President shakes his head, thank you very much, and then he walks out and the National Security Advisor, somebody else walks in and says, you don't want to do that, the President may say, yeah, that's a better idea, and that's where policy goes. So it's, there's a lot of human nature involved in this policy and politics.
One specific exchange really caught my attention. I would love for your analysis of this. Senator Tom Cotton, freshman out of Arkansas, very impressive guy, Iraq combat war veteran. He posed the scenario to the potential Secretary of Defense, the nominee, about capturing a senior leadership of ISIS and how valuable the intelligence would be that we could get from that person, and would you recommend sending this guy to Gitmo? Here's the answer from Mr. Carter, and I would love for you to break this down.
Okay.
I would certainly recommend that he be interrogated for his full intelligence value. It would be a legal determination about where he ended up and so forth. But I think it's important that we get that intelligence value if we do capture people like al-Baghdadi.
Given the administration's position on Gitmo and interrogation, how does that answer square with our policies?
It doesn't, does it? And that's why it's very interesting. I mean, there's a bit of theater involved here, and I think that a secretary or a cabinet nominee or anybody up for confirmation is going to partially say what the Congress wants to hear. That I'm going to speak truth to power, but once again, you are signing on to support the president's agenda, and I just don't see that happening. I mean, we've seen a policy here where the administration has not wanted to interrogate people; they'd rather drone them, because they really don't want to get into this legalistic part of it and sending them to Gitmo.
Yeah, that's too messy. Much cleaner to just kill them, remote control.
But then, of course, he gets a lot of criticism from the left on that. Where's the due process? So it's a very interesting twist of logic that they've embraced here.
All right, I want to turn to the efforts to degrade ISIS or the lack thereof.
Yeah, right.
We have King Abdullah of Jordan, who is ready to tear ISIS limb from limb, if only he could get, as he says, the gasoline, the fuel, and the bullets to do so. And it seems that the Obama administration, has been apparently unwilling to provide that for King Abdullah. Are we doing everything we should do to take advantage of our allies in the region who are willing to do dirty work on our behalf?
Look at the Kurds. Look at the Ukrainians, which has having to do with ISIS, obviously, right? No, there's a reluctance, obviously. Now, I'm hearing breaking news this morning that the Jordanian Air Force is in Syria undertaking a serious air campaign right now. But you're right. They're going to need bombs, and they're going to need spare parts for their F-16s and all these sort of things. And I'm hoping that Congress and the administration will turn to on that and give them what they need. Because one of the problems with the international coalition has been it's not much of an international coalition. And once again, America has been looked upon to do the heavy lifting, and this administration doesn't want to do that much heavy lifting. So there's a possibility that this terrible act, the latest in a series of terrible acts, will galvanize the Arab street, will galvanize the Arab community and the international community to take a tougher hand with ISIS. But I'm a little skeptical. I'm worried about that. I want to see this rhetoric, this soaring rhetoric, turn into action. Now, I'm hearing this morning that Jordan is unleashing the dogs of war to a greater extent on ISIS. But how long will that continue? And once again, like Napoleon, I think it was Napoleon who said, "Your smart listeners will correct me if I'm wrong, but an army fights on its stomach." And it's going to need beans and bombs and spare parts and all that sort of stuff to continue to at a high level of activity. So there are real challenges ahead of us.
Our guest is Peter Brookes, Senior Fellow from National Security Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. And it looks like in terms of the fight against ISIS, the president is really putting most of his political eggs in the basket of lobbying Congress to sign off on this authorization to use force. Now, I remember when President Bush was looking for authorization to use force against Iraq, he was really making the case and really making the pitch. I'm not seeing the same full court press here. What should Congress do with this question?
Well, Larry, I'm not a lawyer, so it's getting a little bit out of it, but I'll give you my opinion is that I think most people feel that the authorization of force that was given after 9/11 is covered here, but
the president is on record saying it doesn't.
Yeah, but maybe because he's saying this is an Al-Qaeda. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
In other words, it's an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, so maybe he wants to do that. And I'm fine with the Congress, doing that. But once again, just because you have the authorization to use force, you got to use force then. And I think that right. Maybe he's looking for the authorization to use more diplomacy. So I'm concerned about this, and I'm concerned about our progress so far on this issue. I mean, we're dealing with a violent Islamist movement. Look, ISIS is planting flags in places like Yemen, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and Libya. Talk about another nightmare. What a mess Libya is today. We're dealing with some serious things, and I believe we're in the crosshairs. People shouldn't forget about Sydney or Ottawa or New York City or Paris. We tend to forget about those things when we're focusing on this terrible tragedy the other day. But this is serious stuff here, and the administration I think is taking too much of a softly approach to it. And how much longer are we going to have to put up with this pain?
All right, Peter Brookes, Senior Fellow from the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.